Good day and welcome to Infrastructure Africa's Panel 6 on Transformational Technology and Innovation in Africa. Today, we're going to be touching on a very important topic around some of the opportunities and challenges for technology and digital within the African continent, and the role infrastructure and service providers can continue to play, as well as governments and the private sector, in really unlocking the potential of digital infrastructure and digital technologies on the African continent. And today I'm joined by a number of key speakers, and I will get to shortly introducing them. But before I get to that, I just want to remind all of our participants today that they should ask questions if they would like to in the chat box as we go through the conversation today. And hopefully, as we get through it, our panelists will spend some time answering those questions and comments you may put into the chat box. We would also like to acknowledge Simon Bromfield from Autodesk and Autodesk themselves, who are today the panel sponsors for this particular panel. So thank you very much to Simon Bromfield and Autodesk for sponsoring this very critical panel. Of course, Autodesk is as well very much involved in design and digital solutions and supporting us within the African context. And we'll get to Simon himself shortly. So if I can just briefly touch on who I am. My name is Prashan Reddy. I am a director at the South African National Energy Association. I'm also a partner at Carney. I lead our work in digital and transformation in Africa. And I'm really excited to moderate this panel with some very, very esteemed and experienced guests that I have. If I move on to the panel, on today's panel, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we have Simon Bromfield. He's the Territory Sales Manager for Sub-Saharan Africa for Autodesk. He's got a strong passion for working in Africa and has already engaged and traveled across more than 20 countries on the continent. And it will be really key to hear what he has to say from a design and digital perspective around the supporting infrastructure and how he's supporting probably most of the engineering and design firms across the continent. So welcome, Simon, and great to have you on the panel. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. We're also joined by Evelyn Garcia, I hope I got that right, the founder and CEO of Tekawatt, who focuses on advisory and skills in the fourth industrial revolution, also the founder of the 4IR Academy, focusing, of course, in developing skills in the space of the fourth industrial revolution, a very important topic. And of course, as in Africa, we want to play a very important role globally in the fourth industrial revolution. She's also an author of the book, Understanding the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So really, we have one of the key experts, I would say, on our panel to help us navigate that topic pretty well. But of course, no stranger to industry, spent more than 15 years in the oil and gas industry and then in various other sectors. So it will be great to hear your perspective as well from an industry point of view when we bring it all together.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome, Evelyn. Lastly, we're joined by Malini Pariachi Saman. She's the founder of MPA Mott Group with more than 30 years of experience in the engineering field. Herself is an engineer and has won many awards in the past, of course, including Civil Engineer of the Year in 2018, as well as an award for investing in young women in 2020, which was last year. MPA Mott, of course, done more than 2,000 projects and in the continent and really focused on in infrastructure and engineering services. So it will be great to hear from Malini and with all her wealth of experience and what she can bring to the conversation in digital infrastructure. So welcome, Malini.
Thank you, Prashant.
Great. So if we can get stuck into the topic, I think, digital is one that's been probably overspoken at these conferences in the past. And I'm hoping that we can bring a new angle and a maybe more tangible flavor to the conversation. Really, we know that the technology is on the rise. We always talk about Africa having the greatest potential. We have, more mobile phones than people, and a growing amount of digital infrastructure on the rise. But really, we have been held back by, let's call it legislation, the lack of investment in infrastructure. If you look at it, we hardly have digital IDs for most of our citizens. policies not supporting the growth of these elements. So we really need to get into the understanding of why there are these challenges in the continent, and how do we resolve them and accelerate the digital transformation in Africa. So as we begin, I would probably just start off by offering some opening remarks to my panelists around the topic, and really just before we get into some of the key questions we need to address as a panel, maybe just to offer some of your opening sort of thoughts on the topic and key focus areas. So I'll start with you, Simon, if we can, just to offer some of your opening views on the topic.
Yeah, it's an incredibly broad topic that, as you said, has been discussed on many, many levels and many planes. And the thing that I find with the discussion around digital is not the lack of digital availability, it's how to use the data that we're generating and what the actual implications are, and where we can go with the technology. Because I think once people adopt it and understand it, you see a rapid adoption of the technologies in Africa, and it's just trying to define why we need it, where it's important, and then the industry picks it up very quickly.
Thank you, Simon. Great. If we can move on to Malini, maybe some of your opening remarks.
Thanks, Bashane. I just feel that, from a professional services perspective and the opportunities that that digital technology lends to our particular industry is rather broad. And considering the challenges that we have on the continent and the accessibility of information and ability to be able to collaborate a lot more effectively, that has proven to be a challenge because of the reach that we currently have with the infrastructure. And I do believe that COVID has allowed us an opportunity to transcend this and to be able to do things differently, and more so to be able to broaden our professional services offering on the continent in a profound way.
Thank you, Malini. And lastly, over to you, Evelyn, for some of your opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you. So I think for me, it's about we're at that point in time when digital transformation, when the shift is happening into the fourth industrial revolution, and I think about Africa and how we've been left out of previous industrial revolutions, but now we have an opportunity to actually take part and actively participate, be the innovators, be the leaders in this fourth industrial revolution. But it's going to really require a lot of work in terms of, the first step being, are we educating ourselves on the technologies that are emerging and how to be, innovators, how to, be good entrepreneurs, for example, overhauling the education system and all that. So there are many things that we still need to address, even in as much as we have the opportunity to be at the forefront of this fourth industrial revolution. There are things that we need to address, and I guess we'll get into that detail a little bit later. Yeah.
Thank you for those opening remarks. And if I can just sum up what I've heard, I think, it's very clear, to Simon's point, if we can be very clear on the why and the where, you made the point that industry will follow. And that obviously speaks a lot to the enablers and governments making it very clear around making the environment attractive for investments and where those investments should go, and really then creating the environment for investment to grow in digital. And I guess Malini, really around how the reach of infrastructure has been limited, and how important building out this infrastructure is going to be, and how COVID-19 has actually offered more opportunity actually for us to think about this, and how the rise of digital services are probably become even more important in the way we engage, interact as Africans. And Evelyn, maybe just you spoke a lot about the education and the skills needed, but also you spoke about entrepreneurship, which in the broader scheme of things is not just about digital and infrastructure, but it's about sort of the philosophy in which we need to ensure our people working and really drive business opportunities. But really, it's important to get the education and skills in the continent if we're going to be seen to be participating in the fourth industrial revolution as a continent. So summing it all up, I think those are sort of the key points you all raised and in your opening remarks. And I think maybe if we can go on to sort of the first conversation, which I think is probably also well spoken about, is there's lots of challenges and how do we start to tackle these challenges? You've made some great points in your opening remarks. How do we start to make this happen realistically and practically? So really removing some of the roadblocks that are preventing us from succeeding in building good digital infrastructure on the continent. And maybe I'll start with you, Malini, because I think having the experience in the engineering services and infrastructure background, maybe you can give us a perspective from that end of the world.
If I had to come in here, Prashan, in terms of the challenges that we currently faced with, I think the connectivity is a critical one, because it would certainly lead to a situation of, if we have connectivity across the continent and good, reliable connectivity, it immediately opens up an entire portfolio of service offerings that we would never have imagined would be possible prior to that. So it's certainly, from the engineering perspective, it affords us an opportunity to be able to repurpose ourselves in the way we actually designing, in the way we approaching design thinking concepts. It also keeps us better informed in terms of the accessibility of large data sets, so that we actually are then creating fit for purpose solutions to communities. I think the biggest learning, in my opinion, on the continent would obviously be around the fact that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. In effect, there's brilliant solutions that have been provided in country on the continent that could then obviously be translated to other parts of the continent in terms of where challenges are experienced. I think, in terms of the opportunity, so accessibility is critical. The fact that we could possibly be doing designs differently and with technology that's high end in any part of the world, literally, and be able to provide services on the continent would be encouraging. And I think from a collaborative initiative, it would have overcome a lot of the challenges that we currently faced with in Africa in terms of accessibility issues, health issues, educational issues, focusing on particularly on females on the continent as well. There's a huge disparity, particularly in our sector, in terms of opportunities that are presented to females on the continent. And that whole entrepreneurial dilemma that we faced with, if you look at the continent itself, I believe that Africa is a prime example of entrepreneurial spirit across the continent. And it will just sort of, allow you to an opportunity to leapfrog that in terms of elevating the status of particularly small business and allowing them to grow. Yeah.
Thank you, Malini. I think those are great points. I really like the points, around if we need to think about repurposing ourselves. We need to think about, how we design differently. And that's fundamental to enabling digital infrastructure and enabling accessibility, as you say, even in the most remote parts of our continent. So thank you for that. Maybe if I can move on to Simon, and maybe from your perspective, Simon, I guess you coming in maybe from more of a software technology angle and are working directly with some of these engineering infrastructure services with your software. So maybe giving some of your perspective on solving these challenges.
Yeah, and I think Malini hit a lot of the very interesting topics that are out there and some of the interesting opportunities that we've got. And I think, I want to talk about two things that have really come up in my life that I've seen with my travels through Africa that show me that the African continent is really resilient, and ability to move very rapidly is something that we can do, and we can really outperform other industries. So the first example, when COVID hit, Africa, many countries went into lockdowns, full lockdowns, some into partial lockdowns. And if you think of a traditional construction process, it was very, very manual, lots of paper. In fact, if you look at the digitization of the construction and infrastructure sector, we was probably the lowest or the worst in terms of moving to digital platforms out of any industry. I think agriculture and I think fishing are two that are lower than us. And I mean, that really showed before COVID that we were not ready to embark upon a digital journey. But what we saw was as soon as COVID hit, we saw firms immediately switching to digital processes, immediately adopting different ways of working. And in my experience with customers, I saw that there was no downtime. Guys shifted overnight to cloud-based technologies, moving their processes into the cloud. And we saw incredible innovation of using technology to overcome problems that people had around, not being able to visit a site and, taking photos with the cell phone, sending them back and then recreating a digital model of the construction site was something that the technology was there, but no one in Africa was really using it properly. And immediately we saw that come online and we saw this incredible uptake of technology and usage. And if I just look at the cloud usage across Africa, I mean, we are growing exponentially every month in terms of the adoption of that. And the second example is around entrepreneurship. And Milani reminded me of a project that I saw in Kenya, which is a company called Transformational, when what they did was they looked at, one of the biggest infrastructure challenges that you've got in Nairobi, and Evelyn, you're going to have to correct me on the names of the slums there, but this company saw an opportunity to turn waste, human waste, into a profit margin and into a profitable business. And they built an entire ecosystem of infrastructure, from portable toilets that were delivered into the environment. These toilets were linked to M-Pesa, so you could pay with M-Pesa to actually access the toilet. They had a digital system that when the toilet was full, that waste was collected and later transformed into fertilizer, coal, and food for animals. And they created a fully self-sustained ecosystem where they were able to challenge delivery issues that normally are sitting with governments and governments' infrastructure problems, and were able to make an incredibly profitable and wide scope business. So I understand they've now moved their business into South Sudan, into Uganda, and these opportunities are where entrepreneurship on the continent can overcome problems and things, challenges that we are facing that governments are just not able to tackle at the moment.
Thank you, Simon. I think very interesting. I mean, we've seen the investments from Amazon and Microsoft in cloud technologies in the continent, and clearly the opportunity is there when you see the majors in the space moving in to ensure the infrastructure is there to allow these things to happen. And some really great examples from the construction space, as well as some innovation in Kenya. I guess you make some very good points, Simon, and so one might argue we're already on our way. So, what's preventing us from turning up the volume? What's preventing us from really scaling and getting this turned up? Is it the entrepreneurship angle? And maybe I come back to you, Evelyn, around this, because those are great points by Simon. It sounds like lots of great work is being done, and things are happening. And we need to sort of, how do we get this going quicker and more rapidly in terms of digital transformation then?
Yeah, I think for me, there are two key things that come to mind in terms of where we start. Number one is education. Number two is strategy. So when you think about education, is education at all levels, primary school, secondary school, tertiary education and the like. So when you look at the primary and secondary school, what needs to happen is that they need to overhaul the education system. That's a given. So they need to introduce the digital skills if that's not already happening. But then as well, you'd ask, like the schools that are not connected, and Malani spoke about connectivity earlier. So the schools that are not connected, so probably schools in the rural areas, how do they get that connectivity? Because that's a key challenge. We can say here, we as the fortunate are able to get connectivity in our houses, in our schools, in our workplaces, but the ones in the rural areas are probably not able to access the digital skills that they need to. So I just remember the project that the United Nations are doing, the GIGA project, which is mapping schools for connectivity. So they're working with the telcos as well to just bring connectivity to schools, and more so rural schools. So I think that's going to be very key in terms of connectivity, bringing that to rural schools and all schools per se. But also, when we talk about digital skills, we cannot ignore entrepreneurship as well. Because I remember when we were growing up, we were told, go to school, get good grades, then you'll get a good corporate job. So everyone was looking towards employment, but now things have changed. And so the people who went into entrepreneurship are probably the ones that did not do very well in school. But things have changed, and we need to not frown upon the ones who go into entrepreneurship, but we need to, harness the skills. So we can't say that we are empowering our youth or our children, for example, with digital skills, but then on the other side, we're not packaging entrepreneurship. And every child can learn a level of entrepreneurship, even if they're 6 years old, 5 years old. There's a level of entrepreneurship that they can learn that, at that level, they can understand pretty well. So I think that's very key for us, training the teachers as well, because they're the ones who are going to train the children in that sense. So I also think about something that one of our largest telcos in Kenya, Safaricom, announced recently. And they were talking about moving into the agile way of working. So moving away from the traditional hierarchical system to working in teams and squads and all that. And, they announced, and this was in the media, and they said that they're actually going to, at the end of the process, they'll end up hiring more staff as opposed to less, which everyone thought, would be the case. And it really echoes what the World Economic Forum again is saying, that 85 million jobs, I think in the Future of Jobs report, this one was for 2020, they actually mentioned that they expect by 2025, I think 85 million jobs will be displaced, but at the same time, 97 million new jobs will be created because of the robot revolution and all that, machines and all that. But the key determining factor is if, to move from the 85 million to the 97 million, the key factor, and I think Safaricom also mentioned it, was about digital skills. That, the people that they're going to employ are more so the ones with digital skills and a technology background. So that's the determining factor for us, is our youth, whether you're in the corporate sector, you're in employment, everywhere, university, digital skills are going to be very key to move us into the fourth industrial revolution for us to actually thrive as Africa. So the other thing I mentioned, so I said literacy and strategy. So again, strategy now at all levels is, how do you pivot? Pivot, you as your career, for example, if you're an individual, but also corporates. Corporates in terms of shifting their business models to take care of this. And we've seen horror stories where companies in the past, have gone extinct because they failed to adapt to technologies. So this has to happen, and where the lines are becoming more blurry between sectors. So media is encroaching on technology, telcos are encroaching on technology, so that's happening. So is, how do you shift your business model to stay relevant in this area? And we're seeing the telcos also making that shift. I think previously we were seeing what are they called? The startups and the smaller innovators, bringing in these innovations, but now we're starting to see the larger corporates shifting their business models. And I'll, speaking back, talking about Safaricom as well, they're transitioning from a telco into a technology company, and that's Safaricom, but also Liquid Telecom also rebranded recently. I think a group rebrand, where they said they're also moving from, or the identity is being rebranded from a technology company, from a telco into a technology company. So we're seeing this shift happening in strategy. So we need to see a lot more in terms of also the country strategies adopting country strategies that are for the fourth industrial revolution.
No, thank you. And it naturally flows into my next question, right, around the African Union's, digital transformation strategy for Africa, which I think speaks to a lot to, around, the digital skills and the capabilities of the continent, but also the strategies that need to be deployed and enabled. And like you correctly said, the shifting business models that are occurring out there. I mean, we all remember what happened to Kodak. We all remember what happened to Nokia. If you don't sort of keep up with the sort of changing digital trends, you tend to be left behind pretty quickly, and some names get forgotten over the years. So maybe if we can just move towards then the African Union's perspective on digital transformation. And because from what I'm hearing, it's very clear that there is a lot of investment already going into the space, a lot of change already happening. Many companies like Safaricom are already starting to pursue this. Even Simon mentioned a number of examples in the construction sector where digitization was accelerated because of COVID-19. There is this traction, and so how does the African Union's digital transformation strategy help us get there, get this blueprint right, get this master plan right across the continent, create the infrastructure for digital trade and movement of people and goods and services much more easily, and really start to then, of course, at the end of it, grow the economies of Africa and make a positive social impact on its people. So maybe let's start to talk a little bit about strategy for the continent and how it can help those businesses you mentioned, Evelyn, as well achieve and change their strategies and not get left behind. So maybe if we can start with Malini, from your perspective, just around the AU's perspective on digitization and how can leaders use this and enable this better?
Thanks, Prashant. 2030 is not too far away in relative terms, but following on from Simon and Evelyn, COVID has certainly allowed us to fast track certain possible strategy interventions that would have taken a long time to do. And one would think that even with the AU digital transformation strategy, it needs to be sort of relooked at on the basis of what is the art of the possible, and more importantly, linked to the regulatory framework around what could possibly repurpose some initiatives that have already started as a result of the pandemic. On that front, if you look at the case in Rwanda and how they've converted the technology around the deployment, the drone technology and the deployment of the blood donations and converted that into COVID now impact, or rather the distribution. That's a prime example as to how one could sort of fast track certain or repurpose certain initiatives that are currently happening as a result of the pandemic. On the opportunities that the strategy presents, I do believe that a very strong collaborative initiative, particularly regionally based, more importantly, and then on the continent, is something that needs to be looked at quite quickly, because I think from a initiation point, we also need to be very conscious and remiss of our population on the continent. A lot of it is very focused around, we have a very large youth on the continent, and unless we actually repurpose them quite quickly and take advantage of this opportunity, you're going to find a lot of unemployed youth on the continent. So, and that lends itself to a whole host of opportunities that present themselves, whether it's on e-learning, on education, on the health sector, on the STEM cells, in terms of the STEM professions with science, technology. It provides opportunities, for a whole host of other initiatives, including the entrepreneurial front. So I would think that we would need to take the pandemic and rather looking at it in a negative way, but more in a positive way in shaping things differently. And I just want to also lead into the discussion around the strategy and the blueprint. I mean, you alluded to the fact of, the opportunities that present themselves in terms of trade opportunities, and more importantly, with regards to on the logistics front. And I think that, the continent offers a huge, huge opportunity, particularly when you look at our resources and the availability of that. But I think that there's another element that needs to be focused on more prominently, apart from the regulatory framework, is the opportunities for us to be able to also not just, to be able to be producers as well, or rather move some of those resource abilities into finished products. And digitization and the opportunities that could lead to could actually benefit the continent. Thanks.
Thank you, Malini. Maybe over to you, Simon. And I think Malini makes some great points around the regional approach. Rather, Africa is a big continent, and in fact very different across the more than 50 countries. So it's always important to also think about things in a regional way. But maybe from your perspective, Simon, on the AU's ambitions, and Malini is right, it's 2030 is around the corner, and progress is probably not as quick as we probably need it to be. But what's your perspective, and what are you seeing from the sort of technology side of things?
Yeah, I think, as a citizen of Africa, and I live here, and I see what's happening here, I actually feel desperately sorry for governments at the moment, because the digitization is really changing everything for them, and it's changing the way revenues are generated, it's changing tax bases, it's changing where people work, how they work, and as a government organization, or as the AU, I think they've got a massive uphill battle in order to, as Melanie said, is to make sure that we remain a producer, not a net consumer of these services. Because as this, digitization and digitization opens up, it doesn't matter where a person sits and where they work. And that opens up not only just the ability for us to trade outside our region, but for other people to be able to offer goods and services into our region that could displace more jobs than what we're expecting. And I think, the idea around the project is amazing, and I think that they really have thought out a lot of processes, but adoption is key, and making sure that we fast track the adoption of the programs and fast track the adoption of the technologies to ensure that we retain those skills, retain those jobs in Africa, and become a net exporter of those roles. A very interesting segment for us is the media and entertainment segment. And you think about, movies that have been produced in Hollywood. A person working on the movie today no longer has to be sitting in a studio in LA. They could be in Cape Town, they could be in Kenya, they could be in Nigeria. As long as they're the right skill, they will be hired onto these projects and being able to deliver for them. And we've seen this change, from these massive studios owned by Disney and all of these companies to these micro studios scattered all over the world. And these are creating thousands and thousands of jobs in areas where we would never have been before. So if we are able to pick up these digital skills and be able to position ourselves as the leader, we will see many, many of these jobs transitioning to Africa. And I think this is the key that we need to understand, and we need to start getting into, into our governments and getting into our people, is that if we're not leading this transformation ourselves, we're going to get left behind. And that is my primary concern around this, and the slow adoption that we've seen through the AU's programs and the adoption of the infrastructure projects in Africa. And if we don't get on top of this now, we're going to have problems in the future.
Yeah, no, a scary thought, in fact. in terms of, you correctly said that people don't need to be located, in the places where maybe the demand or the work is being needed. And that may create, obviously challenges for the continent, but also opportunities, like you say. So, and you look at India's transformation in IT was largely driven by the fact that they were able to provide skilled, cost competitive resourcing to the world. And that certainly could be an opportunity for Africa to help take some of these advantages of this. Maybe if I move to Evelyn on this point, and Evelyn, maybe we can also touch on, because Simon started the point around COVID-19 as well, how it has really transformed our thinking around where people are and where they needed to be, if they need to do a piece of work. So maybe let's also talk a little bit about, you can touch on the AU digital transformation strategy and its opportunity, but also talk a bit about COVID-19 and how we can really leverage it. Maybe touching more on Simon's point, to really make a difference and impact globally as Africans.
Yeah, maybe just to share a bit about, the AU, and the AU has provided a blueprint for digital transformation, which is their digital transformation strategy for Africa. And I think, we really, as governments of Africa, they really need to look at how to adopt that strategy. The countries that have not yet adopted, I know Kenya has, but the ones that have not adopted is to adopt that strategy. And then I think there's also a place for creating task forces around the foundational pillars. So when you look at enabling environment, you look at digital infrastructure, digital skills, and then digital innovation and entrepreneurship, is how can we have task forces around those foundational pillars so that then they can run with it and, be the think tanks around, the foundational pillar, and how best to strategize around that, because strategy is going to be so important. So after educating ourselves, we must really strategize around every area. And there's no point in reinventing the wheel when, AU has come up with a digital transformation strategy. Also, there's a place for, the cross-cutting themes. When you look at the digital transformation strategy, there are the cross-cutting themes, and one of them is emerging technologies. And there's also value in creating a task force around emerging technologies. And I know South Africa has done pretty well in that area with the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So just looking around the emerging technologies, how they're going to impact, every sector, and what strategies can we really adopt? Are there any projects that are high impact that we can, put out there, and as governments lead? So as governments to lead this transformational projects, if you like, some of them, not all of them, because there's a place for government, there's a place for private sector, etc. But also then, just to touch on enabling environment in terms of how the governments also create that enabling environment, there's a book I'm currently reading, which is called The Prosperity Paradox. It's by, I think, a Nigerian, and there are 3 co-authors anyway. So it gives a very good perspective around how, as Africa, probably, where we think that the biggest impact is going to come from is, they actually gave the example of digging wells, in less fortunate areas, and that's going to be the greatest impact for transformation for Africa will come from market creating innovations. That's what they call them. So market creating innovations meaning creating a market where there was no market before, and M-Pesa is a very good example of where, people did not have access to phones, to banks, because it's a financial solution. They did not have access to banks, like the rural communities or people who are outside the banking system. But now they're able to sort of transfer money, keep funds in their wallet via mobile money. So that created a market where there was no market. So I think that's going to form the biggest impact. So governments really need to, or regulators really need to look at how they're creating an enabling environment, not rushing towards taxing, for example, taxing these new innovations, but how can they also just enable, create tax incentives of every kind around new innovations to encourage that sense of innovation. So that's just what I wanted to touch on in terms of in terms of the AU and the AU strategy. But in terms of COVID-19, I think what COVID-19 did is sort of accelerate us into the fourth industrial revolution, because this concept was already there. But what happened is now when the pandemic came, people are not able to go to work, or they could go to work, but they risk the infection. So we had to look for strategies for social distancing, strategies for people to access healthcare. And I know Malani touched a little bit on that. Cashless payments as well. So the use of e-commerce, working from home, learning from home. And I think when she talked about, I think, drones and stuff like that, is how do we create the access? So if someone is probably in the house and they need to go and take the test, maybe they feel like they have caught the virus, can drones come and pick or collect samples? Is there a way that that collection of samples can happen, not necessarily at home, maybe the nearest center, which maybe could not be accessed before? So that kind of scenarios, and also how they can leverage the digital space to see social distancing, also cashless payments is such a big deal in terms of now people, how do I say this? Cashless payments, meaning, the COVID-19 pandemic is there. So you want least amount of contact between people. So I think that's where we are going. And also, when we talk about the platform technology, is one of the key technologies of the fourth industrial revolution. And we're seeing it coming a lot more. When we look at platforms, is how to create platforms that can, and I think, AU has actually done that. A trusted, is it Africa CDC trusted travel platform or something like that, where you can log in and if I've got, it will tell you which are the laboratories, the labs that you can actually get yourself tested if you're traveling to another outside the country, for example, how to get vaccine information. Public health authorities would also be able to get that information. So it's about platforms that would enable us to respond faster to this pandemic, being cognizant of the fact that we need to be socially distanced. We need to access healthcare, for example. And I think also healthcare financing is a key concept. And I see a lot of mobile money coming in, especially for the less fortunate, because we can't say as Africa, we are going to thrive in this fourth industrial revolution if only a select few are thriving. So we have to look at the population that does not have access to financing, does not have access to medical healthcare, does not have access to insurance and all those things. So mobile money is a key enabler to making sure that happens. So, and I think there's one of the innovations, again, by Safaricom, which is called M-TIBA. And M-TIBA is like a mobile health wallet. So it's an innovation around, you sort of put money in that wallet, or someone else can put money in that wallet. And, so you have a sizable amount. In case of any health challenge, then you can access healthcare, affordable healthcare. And I know they're also partnering with the big health insurance providers to provide affordable healthcare to the low income earners, if you like. But that's also accessible to the middle income and everyone else. But I focus more on the low income earners, because we have to lift as we climb. We can't say as Africa we're thriving if only a select few are thriving. So yeah.
Thank you, Evelyn. Some really great points. And you raised the case of M-Pesa and mobile money, and I guess with the progress of infrastructure being the basis of that success, right? If now that, because we have the mobile infrastructure in place, it allows us to think differently about what is possible and what solutions we can offer from a digital and mobile perspective. And that's a great success story, and of course has now been replicated and grown across the world in terms of mobile transactions and mobile money. And that's why we have banks feeling a little bit uncomfortable about telco operators nowadays. And the same, the great example you now provided around insurance companies maybe needing to think about what telco companies could be doing with regards to digital solutions around medical insurance and where that will go. But it's very clear to me that COVID-19 accelerated the thinking around the fact that having distributed infrastructure can allow you to gain access to services no matter where you are, be it education, be it working from home, be it health services, be it whatever it may be. And therefore, infrastructure is critical. It's absolutely critical if we're going to be successful in thinking differently, moving differently, and getting to maybe 5G across the continent, or really having the kind of infrastructure we need to accessible to everybody on the continent. So maybe if I talk a little bit about that, and coming back to you, Malini, on this point, and I know it's a little bit off topic, but I think how do we get the infrastructure scaled quick enough and fast enough across the continent so that we can actually benefit and offer different business models and solutions and thinking in the digital space with regards to the telcos? Are they doing enough? What's preventing them from doing more? What's preventing us from scaling mobile infrastructure even faster and making it even more accessible?
Prashen, that's a very interesting question that you posed to me, and I think that I also want to just link it to the whole, the COVID impact, because the reality of the situation is such that unlike with first world countries where they've got the luxury of big stimulus packages to be able to take them out of where they're currently sitting and the impact of the pandemic, on the continent we don't have that luxury. And therefore, we need to be looking at reinventing ourselves and how do we actually use this to create those opportunities. So I certainly think, the opportunity that the Africa Free Trade Agreement presents itself, and I'm sure we're going to touch on that a bit later, is one such element that we need to take quite seriously in terms of, ensuring that the infrastructure rollout is actually escalated. More importantly, I think that it also affords us an opportunity to be able to collaborate a lot more as partners, as opposed to countries trying to solve their own problems. And I think it also lends itself to an opportunity for us to address some of the legacy issues we tend to face on the continent. And irrespective of which country you are in on the continent, we do have some serious legacy issues, and we can certainly we could possibly be in a position to do things slightly different to what the norm has been to date, and therein I think lies a huge opportunity for industry, for government, and for the specialists in particular areas to be able to contribute effectively in order to change how we do things on the continent. I certainly think, and I would like to stress on the free trade agreement again, I think from a planning perspective, we tend to also be working in silos, and that needs to be broken down if we want to actually be rolling out infrastructure at scale. And I think, there's a lot to be said on that, because rather than duplicating efforts, we could be able to collaborate a lot more extensively and be able to roll at scale. And I think from I think first and foremost, it's more important that the regulatory framework and all that is kind of taken into consideration. And unless that's sorted out, it's going to be practically impossible to even be looking at collaborative initiatives. So I think that's where it literally starts. And it needs to be an enabling environment to start creating the innovative thinking as to how we can actually roll it out at scale. I also think it's going to require us to relook at the way we conduct our own businesses on the continent, because from an operational efficiency and from a reach, from the ability that digital technology would now afford most companies, you've got to sort of be thinking ahead of the game in every respect. And what has typically not been focused on, and I know certainly in the South African context, is that we've not been paying much attention to innovation and technology over a number of years now. It's been like business as usual. But suddenly with the COVID impact, it's those industries and entities that have actually been keeping abreast of what's happening in that space that have come out of this a lot smarter and a lot quicker than most other entities. And I think there's a lesson in there that we need to also be looking at innovation and technology as a very specific, objective with businesses, and there needs to be quite a lot of investment in that respect. And I think that going forward, it would mean that we are going to be doing things a lot quicker, a lot faster, and operational efficiency is going to be key. But at the same time, I think it also presents us with an opportunity, if there is reach on the continent, to be able to then design and respond to community needs and to be conscious of what is required, in those environments. So I would think that our designs are going to be a bit more adaptive to changing needs of communities and their demands, and fit for purpose solutions. And if we are able to understand needs and requirements through survey instruments or smartphone technology, that people could immediately be able to be communicating with designers, it would immediately create a whole new sense of what would be fit for purpose solutions in specific areas. And the amazing thing about it is, if we have the infrastructure, accessibility to rural communities and things would actually make it that much more appropriate in terms of the solutions we provide. So, yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you. I think that certainly very clear that that collaboration is going to be critical and in that space to allow it to happen. So Simon, I know that you wanted to add to this, so maybe I'll come over to you now.
Yeah, thank you. And Melanie, you raised some really interesting top points there. One thing that we've seen, and this is Infrastructure Africa discussion, infrastructure is one of the biggest costs to governments around the globe, and especially in Africa. And, when we talk about infrastructure, we talk about water, transport, electricity, as well as digitization and digital connectivity. And when we look at a fiscus of a government, in some countries, I can't remember what the number was for the 2030 plan in Kenya, it was a stupid amount of the budget was going into the construction of these new roads, new rail systems, new pipe infrastructure. And I think this is where digitization can play a crucial role in allowing us to decrease the costs of delivery of these projects. And if we're able to adopt technologies and technology standards, we can reduce costs immensely. I mean, we would, think of school projects, for instance, technologies around schools. And I was talking to the Department of Public Works here in South Africa a couple of years ago when we had this problem where schools were getting looted and burnt down. And the concept, the then head of the department said to me, why, Simon, can't we just build a school on the back of a truck and send it into the place and get it built on site? Not built, but get it erected. And this concept is something that is really growing very rapidly around the world, around the blending of construction processes and manufacturing processes. And if we could build a school in a factory, we have complete control over the environment, and then we just erect it on site. We could really look at how we can reduce costs around projects and execution of projects. And this is where I think digital technologies can really drive an evolution in the way we build infrastructure on the continent. And globally, there's a program called BIM, or Building Information Modeling, and there's standards. There's an ISO standard that has been now published in Europe and across the globe. And I think this is something that governments really need to take a strong look at, and we need to start implementing the ISO 19650 standard into the way we approach projects across the continent. Because if we're able to do that, we can really bring proper cost-effective ways of building and reducing costs. I mean, if you just look at waste on a standard construction project, on a road project, about 25% of your costs is waste. And if we can just drop that by half, imagine what we could do with that extra revenue that we're opening up And Melanie spoke about, we don't have the big fiscus programs and policies out there to allow us to for governments to be able to dig themselves out of these holes. But if suddenly we can do, if we had $100 million to spend on something, and suddenly we can save 10%, 20% of that cost by using digital technologies, what more could we do? Could we build more schools? Could we put that infrastructure in place to deliver services to rural areas? And I think this is the crucial bit that governments can play, and that we need as industry to look at and say, let's adopt a BIM standard. Let's adopt an ISO standard for Africa or for our region that can help us to build buildings more effectively, talk the same language, because as we know in construction, the architect doesn't speak to the civil engineer, he doesn't speak to the construction person, because this is our IP, we don't want to share it. But that's the wrong way to approach these projects. We need to, as Africa, we need to say, let's get rid of this legacy thinking and start thinking modern ways, and start owning this BIM and this building information modeling technology, and start sharing best practices between each other and allowing us to build these projects faster and better. And if we can get this right, I think we can really deliver on these goals that we've put for ourselves.
Great, thank you, Simon. I'm conscious of time. We have about 2 minutes now to close, but that's a fantastic way to, I guess, end sort of the Q&A space and discussion and head into our closing. And very, very interesting ideas, I think, practical ideas around how digital can support in the construction industry and bringing the manufacturing and construction industries closer together to improve the way in which we execute and ensure that we don't have wasteful expenditure and delays on projects. I really like the thinking, Simon. Hopefully we can continue this in other forms, in other discussions. But let me allow you guys to an opportunity to close before we finally close the session. And maybe if you have some other thoughts, you can also include them in your parting words to our audience. Not more than 30 seconds, please, if I can ask. So maybe I'll start with you, Evelyn.
Yeah, it's been such a wonderful discussion. I've also learned so much from Simon and Malani and yourself. So just to say that we cannot overemphasize the need for skills, the need for education, the need for strategy. I think that's going to be so key as Africa. And I say it's also important for us to connect to the Sustainable Development Goals, because again, like I mentioned, let's lift as we climb. We have to speak one voice as Africa. We can't say, only the ones who can access connectivity, for example, can access capital, are the ones who should actually benefit. How else can we give back to the ones who are not able to? How can we create innovations around those who do not have access to capital, do not have access to, I don't know, whatever it is, connectivity. So let's think about also in whichever corporates we work for, entrepreneurs, if you're entrepreneurs or wherever, whichever space that we are in, is how do we give back? How do we use the technology to give back? How do we use platforms? Because we've seen platforms being used to connect people, to connect even the ones who were not able to access markets, for example. So let's use technology to give back or to raise the standard for us all as Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. And then we can go over to Malani for your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Prashan. And it's been a very interesting discussion with my fellow panelists. I like the fact that Simon has stressed quite categorically the importance, particularly in the construction sector. And Evelyn's brought in the piece around the entrepreneurial and the sustainable development goals, and which I also believe provides an opportunity if we are able to provide access to most individuals on the continent. And I think the exciting bit about it is we are at a particular time in history that we have the power to actually change a lot of things. And unless we take that opportunity and move forward with it, we're gonna be held as the generation that actually sat back and did nothing. And I think that in itself is encouraging, because I see huge opportunities for us on the continent. We have big problems, but I think that the challenges just make it that much more interesting, because we have the ability to be able to solve them and solve them effectively, without leaving anyone behind, more importantly. And I think collaboration is the key to that. And I think the Africa Free Trade Agreement is a document that we need to test, and we need to make sure that it works appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you, Malini. Great closing comments. And lastly, over to you, Simon, for your final words before we close.
Just like to say, for my closing remarks, thank you to the panelists. It was really interesting, and I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I would love to continue it. I think just my closing remark is, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's use our ability as Africans to leapfrog in technology, and let's take the learnings out of Europe and out of Singapore and out of China, and let's adapt them for Africa, and let's implement them. And thank you for today.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you to my panelists. I think it's been great discussion. Once again, just to acknowledge Autodesk and Simon for the sponsorship of this particular panel. Thank you for tuning in for our discussion in Infrastructure Africa. Hopefully, we have plenty of questions and comments, and the conversation continues. It's just the start. We've ignited some great ideas, and we had a great discussion today. I really enjoyed discussing this topic with you guys. So thank you very much, and we look forward to the follow-on chat discussions. Thank you.